Welcome back to the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. Today we're talking about one of the most advanced longevity testing modalities ever to hit the face of the planet. What is it? It's called Prenuvo, a full body MRI scan that gives such an unbelievably detailed analysis of every single organ system in my body. The owner and founder of Prenuvo, Andrew Lacy, joins me today to talk about the technology, what they're actually looking at, and why most men over 40 are actually investing the time and capital to go get this tested. Why he started the company specifically was to look at what's actually happening inside the body. We have a lot of subjective information, a lot of biochemistry, but we don't have a lot of looks at biology. What's your brain saying? And the cool thing about this Prenuvo exam is that they can actually diagnose cancer very, very early, and hopefully as a preventative. They can diagnose a lot of deteriorating joints. They can diagnose a lot of heart and lung issues. One of the most interesting things about the Prenuvo after having done the exam is that they can literally see every little aspect of your brain, every little aspect of your lungs and your heart and your liver and your joints. And it gave me a lot of incredibly valuable insights. So I wanted to take the time to interview Andrew Lacy and see what we can learn about what Prenuvo actually can tell us about what's happening inside of our body. You're going to love the podcast, and if you do, listen all the way to the end because I have an amazing offer for you from Prenuvo themselves. Enjoy the show. So you're a Stanford grad originally, and I'd love to hear just sort of how you got started in this world of specifically health tech. I know you're a serial entrepreneur, but specifically what was the path for you to start this health tech company?
To be honest, I'm probably a little bit unusual in the longevity space. I'm not sort of, I would say, someone that's at peak fitness or peak health. You know, I've been doing and building these companies for so long, and I think it's a rare entrepreneur that doesn't sort of invest some part of their vitality in the businesses that they're building. And so, you know, and I think that's understandable. And I think we as business owners, we have to have a certain level of grace, you know, to sort of, understand that you can't both be sort of at peak health and sort of like be building interesting things for the world, or it's very rare that you're able to do that. But I wanted to make the decisions I was making about my health a lot more explicit. So I sort of went looking for answers. And that led me to someone that was doing an early version of what is now a Prenuvo scan. And I learned a lot about my health that, the things that I knew I had to work on earlier rather than later. And I also learned that I was generally, in spite of my best efforts, in good health, and sort of gave me a lot of comfort that, to continue to invest in building things that are meaningful for myself and the world.
Yeah. So all of our listeners are generally going to be some version of entrepreneurs, executives, CEOs, high achievers in general. So I'd love to hear what it looked like for you to work prior to Prenuvo, like what work looked like and what that discovery process looked like on the health side. Like before we even get into understanding Prenuvo, I'd love to see like what the long days looked like, and then ultimately what the discovery path looked like to finding a path to better health.
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump into it.
Yeah.
Open book.
Yeah. So if you'd love to, or if you could just walk me through what an average day looked like before you discovered your health, because I think a lot of our listeners will relate.
Yeah. So I, just to give the brief history of myself. So I graduated from law school actually back in Australia 25 years ago. I worked briefly as a lawyer. I worked as a management consultant. Both of these are professions that, basically you're required to work 7 days a week and have very long days. And I was sleeping maybe 5-6 hours a day. I wasn't exercising. I didn't, it was a lot of travel. So it was very difficult to maintain sort of even a good routine around nutrition. I moved over to the US 20 years ago and studied a business degree and sort of fell in love with the startup ecosystem and building companies. And it was really nice to be working on things, being an owner, really being able to see the impact of the investment of my own time, but it's still a pretty brutal profession. And I would say the average entrepreneur that I meet is, some chronically stressed and, trying to make ends meet. And particularly as you get older and you have a family, those trade-offs become even more real. Yeah. And for me, I was about to start a company. I just finished one. I was about to start a new one. I remember just looking in the mirror and just saying, hey, how do I know if I'm going to work my butt off to build another company over the next 5-10 years, how do I know I'm going to be around to even like see the fruits of that labor?
Yep.
And and how do I get more comfort around just the general state of my health? And so I went and did all these tests, colonoscopies, blood tests, and so on, but it just felt like there were bits and pieces of the answer, and there was not sort of a holistic understanding of what was going on from head to toe. And that's where I started seeking out folks that were kind of looking inside the body with MRI machines.
Beautiful. Do you think that looking back at it now, there's ways to do what you did in building these companies without having to burn the candle at both ends, or do you think it's just part of the entrepreneurial journey?
I personally think it's part of the journey. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's a real exception. I mean, unless maybe your business is being fit.
Hmm.
And I guess if you're sort of building a physical coaching business, probably you're going to generally be looking after yourself. But folks that are building, app businesses or online businesses, I just think it's really hard.
Yeah, you're right.
And a lot of people, there's a lot of revisionist history. I remember I ran into Jeff Bezos a while back, and he's looking really good now.
Yeah.
But
he wasn't always.
he wasn't always like that.
Yeah.
It's hard. And I guess like you hope that you can not wait too long to sort of course correct. And when you have the financial resources or the success to be able to do it.
It sounds like what would have been useful to you is understanding the most effective levers to be pulling. Is like, what can I be doing? Because within the confines of the constraints I've put on myself around time and around, I've got to be sitting down, I've probably got to be programming, I've got to be on meetings. Like, what would be some levers that I could pull? And so you went and discovered that, hey, if I take these images of my body, at very least it can give me an insight as to what's happening visually in my body. And then there's obviously the chemical aspect that we can test as well. And it allows you to be really precise and effective with the interventions you choose.
Well, not just that. My sense is that there's a lot of biomarkers that we're tracking now, and sometimes we don't really think about what's behind that word biomarker. I mean, it's an indication that helps us maybe get a sense of what might be happening inside the body. But what's great about MRI is you're able to actually really look inside the body and see the state of every organ. Yeah. And what we found, having scanned so many people now, is like we'll find people that have, horrible LFTs, so liver function test results, but have really good looking livers. Like maybe they were just genetically gifted. And we'll have folks that, may have really good LFTs, and we'll see fatty liver or fibrosis and may have no idea. So those biomarkers are really important to follow 100%, but they're only one part of the story. And if you're able to look inside, it's sort of so valuable because you can really just see the state of the organs inside your body.
Yeah. And so that makes it a useful reference that I can allow the audience to wrap their head around. So when I look at the body, there's 3 levels of organization in the body. We look at biology, which is the organ systems, which is sort of the physical structures. And then there's chemistry, which is the interaction of all the molecules. And there's physics, which is the vibration and frequencies. And all 3 of those are going to intersect at some point. I think as an exercise professional or as a performance professional, looking at all levels of those are required for us. And like your business does an incredible job at specializing in that biological aspect and letting me look at biological tissues as they form shift and transition from what would look like a healthy tissue to what may look like a potentially degrading or unhealthy tissue. So that's a useful framework that will help our audience wrap their head around sort of how we're navigating this today.
Well, and also to understand the impact of genetics. So I think a lot of us focus on the bit that we can control, which is appropriate, which is sort of our lifestyle, the way we're exercising, the food we're eating, and so on. But what we see when we look inside is, obviously people's bodies are reacting differently to the same amount of inputs. And a big part of that difference is really explained by genetics. And so you have these sort of stereotypes, like the skinny, fat South Asian, for example. Mm-hmm. And, these are people that look skinny on the outside, but they have a lot of visceral fat on the inside. Or we run into a lot of, triathletes or people that run a lot and they do carb loading. And their livers are just not able to process that amount of carbs. And we see fatty liver in someone who on the outside might have a six pack and looks really healthy. So that genetic component is also really important. And there's no way to really test for it directly. You have to look at the sort of end organ state to sort of get a sense of that.
Yeah, for sure. So we talk about the interaction of three different things. We want harmony between our genetics, our lifestyle, and our environment, right? And so like the word I think that best describes it is harmony, because your body does certain things really well and your body does other things really poorly. And sometimes you can see an image of that, and sometimes you can see that in biochemistry. And certainly we can look at somebody's genetic, blueprint, their genotype, and say, hey, this is what you're most likely to do well based on the data we've got. And yeah, I think the future of all performance, whether it be longevity or just health optimization, is really, really precise. And so that's the beauty of where we've gone literally in the last probably 3 to 5 years, is with these amazing technologies to test, we can see so many explicit details and biomarkers that allow us to be effective in our interventions. So, I think I'd be curious to hear what you guys find most. What seems to be the things that coming up most? Like, why are people coming to Prenuvo, and what are the things that are coming up most? Is it you've brought up fatty liver a few times? I suspect that's a pretty common one that people can't see or feel. Although generally we can see that pretty effectively in like a general blood panel. I'm curious what else you get. I know there's precancerous tumors and things like that, but I'm curious if that's coming up often, or what's the most common diagnosis?
Yeah, so I think the reason people first come in is usually to check that they don't have something life-threatening. And I would say the two categories of conditions that we see that fall in that bucket are cancer and aneurysm. And collectively, about 1 in 25 people have a potentially life-saving finding in one of those two buckets. It's about 1.6% of people we find cancer, or we find lesions that end up being later characterized as cancer. And about 1% of people have clinically actionable aneurysms. These might be in the brain, they might be around the heart, or they might be in the abdomen.
Wow.
But that means that the vast majority of people get an all clear. There's nothing inside that is going to kill you potentially quickly. Then the focus really shifts to, well, what can we tell you about how your lifestyle is impacting the underlying physiology of your body? And here we start to think about and talk about chronic disease and how early can we bring back the clock? How quickly can we start to identify, for example, neurodegeneration or metabolic disorders or renal function or chronic inflammatory conditions? And what we're finding is we can see these a lot earlier than they present as symptoms. And that really gives people a lot more time to make lifestyle modifications, ideally, never have to get surgery, never have to take medication to sort of change the trajectory of some of those diseases.
So you said neurodegenerative diseases. Let's double click on that for a minute here and talk about like what's presenting. If I look at my Prenuvo and there's some preclinical exposure to some type of neurodegenerative disease, what am I actually going to be seeing on an MRI printout?
Sure, we can sort of walk backwards in time. So when we image someone that actually is symptomatic for, say, a dementia, what we tend to see is very obvious brain volume loss. So you'll see when you look inside that person's skull, you'll see perivascular space. So you'll see these cavities where brain used to be. The brain looks almost like it's been shrinking. If you go a little bit back in time, we start to see the outsides of the brain. So these are the folds. We start to see them flattening out. Something's happening to the blood flow of those regions that's causing them to flatten, to sort of lose their profile. Before that, we start to see actually changes in perfusion of blood in the brain.
What does that look like on a scan?
So we do an advanced neuroscan for this, and it actually shows up we map the entire brain, and you see regions that are red where we have a lot of blood flow, and regions that are blue or purple where the blood flow is much reduced.
Yep.
And in particular, there's a part of the brain, if you look sideways, we have two big arteries going up the front, and we have one artery going up the back. And the piece in the middle here has the poorest blood flow in general. And it's no surprise that hippocampal region is where Alzheimer's likes to start. And so we really want to make sure that the blood flow to that part of the brain is pattern, is appropriate. And that I just described probably a 20-year process. It starts with poor blood flow. it then starts to change the outsides of the brain. Then we start to get brain volume loss. And by the time you're actually clinically diagnosed, if you hadn't had done these scans, you've already lost on average 30% of your hippocampal volume. So if we can find this early, we can change the trajectory of disease through diet and nutrition.
Yeah, so it sounds like the cardiovascular system is sort of the linchpin here that everyone, and we know that in our space, but like the listener may not make that connection between like, hey, why am I being forgetful? Why am I not able to think as clearly? And I think it's generally going to start with that blood flow to the brain specifically.
Well, and also when you do a blood test, you get some numbers. So you see a cholesterol number, or you do, for example, you read your blood pressure. And these are numbers. It's really hard sometimes for people to connect that with what's going on inside their bodies.
Yeah.
But we can show people, hey, you have high blood pressure, you're not taking your meds. Here's the end organ damage in the brain. So we can see like these ischemic changes. And it really is a wake-up call in a way, that sort of sometimes numbers on a page don't give you, is to actually see the organs themselves sort of responding to this metabolic load that you're putting on them.
Yeah, very cool. What other types of things show up in the brain? Like I'm guessing you've seen some cancers. I'm guessing you've seen some preclinical marks of some kind on the brain. I'm curious what else like an average person might see.
So I would say what we tend to see in everyone, and we give them a cute name. They're called age-related white matter lesions.
Yep.
And you think of your brain as having tons of plumbing. And this is a little piece of plumbing that got gunked up. And when it got gunked up, the brain at the end of that piece of plumbing, essentially that piece of brain died. And it shows up as a little white spot in our brains. And everyone has a couple of these. We generally allow people to have one per decade. And we don't quite know why it got gunked up. But when we start to see this happening systemically, that's when we start to think about there being a cardiovascular metabolic condition that is essentially getting in the way of good blood flow in the brain. And we see that in probably 15 to 20% of people, over the age of 40. And obviously it's pretty highly correlated with lifestyle and activity.
Yeah.
So if people are exercising, they're getting healthy, they're having healthier brains. And we're seeing this in our research. We published a study last year that drew explicit correlation between exercise and brain volume, between lower visceral fat levels and brain volume. So we're starting to understand that all of these parts of the body obviously are connected. And so how you look after your body is going to affect the health of your brain.
A lot of the guys I work with are either current athletes or ex-athletes, and CTE is a really big thing amongst our communities because so many guys have experienced some type of brain trauma in their life. And I'm curious how prevalent that is, what shows up, and if you've ever seen anybody for any of these interventions actually reverse it with effective diet and exercise protocols.
So we do see it. We see it on these more advanced scans that we do. We can see little microbleeds that are sort of typical for CTE. I don't know to what extent you can repair brain tissue. My understanding is you can't, but you have a lot of plasticity in the brain. So you can actually sort of damage the brain a lot without actually sort of noticing it. And that means that, that plasticity gives you the opportunity to really restore or improve or arrest decline of brain function if you really focus on that in your personal lifestyle.
So does a typical Prenuvo scan actually do that level of detail where you can see these microbleeds, or is that another level? Because you sort of mentioned there's the deeper test.
Yeah, we do it. We have a comprehensive exam where it's the exam we've been doing for the most amount of time. It's what most people choose, and it's a great all-round examination. And then we have something called enhanced, which adds a brain volume quantification. It adds these additional neurosequences, so we can see perfusion in the brain. We can look for these little micro tears. So it's probably, we believe, the most detailed neuro exam that you can do to understand basic neuro health and how your brain is tracking relative to your age.
And so Prenuvo is not in the business of making any prescriptions or diagnoses afterward, or diagnoses maybe, but prescriptions as far as like, hey, we've seen this instance in the brain. This is what you need to go do. You guys don't do that.
So we actually do provide recommendations.
Okay.
It's really interesting. Okay. When I started the business, and we started working with radiologists, I just read so many reports that were like, lesion in segment 4 of the liver, 3.2 centimeters, neoplasm cannot be excluded. And neoplasm is a fancy word for cancer. So, you put that in the hands of a patient and, you can create a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
So one of the first things we did was say, hey, no, we're going to provide detailed recommendations here. So, what would I do as a radiologist if I had this finding in my own body? And so when patients come and get a scan, they get this detailed organ by organ summary of what we see and what we don't see. And if we see something, how important is it to get it looked into? And the goal here really is to empower people with, these insights and sort of a plan of attack so that they can go back to their providers and know exactly what to do.
Yeah. So when it comes to the brain, the loss of volume is this really big elephant in the room that we want to watch for. And the primary ways we know to improve that from what you say are going to be blood flow. I think probably complex movement of any kind, learning new skills, but blood flow is probably the primary driver, it sounds like, yes, in your experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, there's some new research and obviously exercise gets the blood flowing.
Yeah.
I would say there's some new research by out of Stanford, Professor Longo, that focus on diet as well. So, but it's Mediterranean diet, it's exercise. So the sort of things that you could imagine anyhow are going to be important lifestyle modifying sort of interventions.
Yeah, we'll do a deep dive on ways to improve hippocampal volume, specifically in brain volume, in another podcast. We actually have done some research looking at different types of psychedelic mushrooms, different types of psychedelics, different types of obviously blood flow agents, just natural occurring ones, pycnogenol, ginkgo biloba, things like this. So we'll do another deep dive on that coming up in the near future as a follow-up to this, because I think once people hear that they should be doing a Prenuvo, they're going to want to know what the heck to do with it once they see the end result. So moving along to the heart, because I think most people are looking at the two primary organs. I think most of my clients are going to look at is their brain and their heart. What can you see on a Prenuvo that the average listener may not have experienced or may not even realize is there?
So the heart is probably the area of the body that we have the most challenge seeing clearly, because obviously when we're imaging you, you're both breathing and your heart is beating. And with an MRI, you can take very good images of the heart, but it just takes a very long time. So most people don't do that. So what we look at in the heart is just general heart shape and size. And we know that the shape and size of the heart responds positively to increased physical activity. And then we can understand how well the heart is pumping blood by looking at the lungs and the lower extremities. So if we see fluid buildup, we know that there may well be a problem with the way the heart is pumping. But if we can't see the arteries that are feeding the heart, we can't tell whether you have plaque, either hard or soft plaque, that sort of could be blocking an artery. We can start to see the end organ damage, what I was describing before, the ischemic changes in the brain. But we can't see the heart directly. So we do recommend folks that are worried about that to go investigate getting a calcium score or a CCTA, where they can sort of identify and map any plaque they might have on their heart.
Got it. And how about the lungs? Yeah, how about the lungs? Is that something you guys, I thought there was some inclusion to the lungs, or is that because it's moving as well, it's difficult?
Well, we ask patients to do breath holds. So we do get clear images of the heart, of the lungs. And we are finding lesions that turn out to be cancerous in the lungs. And there's a lot of research about how MRI-based techniques compare to CT-based techniques, which is a typical way of looking for lung cancer.
Very cool. And so the thing that showed up most on mine, I'm pulling up my results here in front of me, is there's a lot of bone and joint degradation in my life. I was a professional bodybuilder in a previous life, and my shoulders are not happy. My hips are not happy. My lumbar spine's got some arthritis. I think just about every bone in my body has some arthritis. I don't feel it, but they're all there. Yeah, I'm curious if most people over 40 have some degree of arthritis in general.
Yeah, I would say the most interesting thing for me is when we opened our first clinic in Silicon Valley, for the first time, we started getting patients in their 20s and 30s. And we were already finding degenerative changes in the spines of people in their 20s. And in fact, when we showed some of these spines to radiologists, and asked them to guess the age of that person, they often would say, oh, this is someone in their 40s. So something's going on among young people. Mainly, we think because we obviously spend a lot of time sitting down and we spend a lot of time on devices. And when you're looking at a mobile phone, like your head is not, we're not biologically evolved to hold our head in this sort of like orientation. And so we see this cervical spine disc slippage in much younger people than we used to. Now, to your point, like most of these people may be asymptomatic and they may never be symptomatic, but we can start to see these disc bulges and we can actually look at the spinal cord of these patients. And some people have very tight spinal cords and those disc slippages are going to lead to pain. And some may have very wide spinal cords and you can actually have a lot of degradation without symptoms. So just understanding what type of person are you? Do you have a big spinal cord, like a big sort of capacity to absorb degeneration without becoming symptomatic or not? Because that's going to matter when you're in your 50s and 60s. If that pain results in low mobility, we know that low mobility leads to, shortened lifespan.
Yeah, a lot of people like to blame sitting or specifically like technology, like looking down at phones, and I think it's inaccurate. I think that the truth is it's probably more likely to do with couches and chairs because we slouch so much and we stop using the muscles of our paraspinals. And if you're just to sit on the floor, all of the muscles that run from the base of the skull run to the base of the spine are going to be active. And if that's one of the first interventions I do with all my clients. It's like, hey, you need to spend some time sitting in a vertical aligned spine. Because most people are just like sitting constantly, and even if you're standing, it's not usually great for a lot of people, or it's not challenging your postural muscles. So simply sitting on the floor is extremely useful to prevent that cervical forward head posture, because all those muscles have to pull you back. Otherwise, you're going to feel like you're getting fatigued very quickly. So it's definitely something that's common, and I think it's just like way too much time in chairs.
Yeah, I mean the visual I think is helpful for people to understand is you can think of your spine as almost like a tent pole, and you have the muscles that run up your back, and then you have your core muscles that are sort of pulling down that tent on both sides. And if you're bending in one direction for long periods of time, that tent pole in the middle starts to bend one way or the other, and that's when you get degeneration. So, I when I did my first scan, I had a lot of degeneration in my cervical spine. I didn't know about it. I was asymptomatic, and ever since that moment 6 years ago, I have like a walking treadmill desk now, and most of the time, I don't do podcasts on it because it's a bit distracting, but I do a lot of meetings, walking, with a desk where my screen is, perfectly level with where my eyes are, so I don't have to bend at all. And it's worked wonders for me.
I don't think it's the bending that's the problem. I think humans have evolved to bend. I think it's the absence of contraction of the other side. So like we would have historically, sat and looked at the ground. We would have been in squats very often, evolutionarily. And like, maybe you could argue their spines would also be degenerated thousands of years ago. But I think as long as we activate the muscles on the posterior side of the body, the posterior side of the spine, it'll pull everything back into alignment. It's just the absence of contraction there. And as I said, standing doesn't do that, because standing you're vertically aligned, so there's no divergence away from the center of mass. Anyways, we could riff on physical optimization for a long time.
But it's really important, and people don't, I think, really fully understand how important it is. And I think it's the one thing that you can start working on really early in your life, and it will pay dividends as you get older.
Yeah. Does the Prenuvo scan give degrees? Like, how accurately can we rely on the diagnostic to understand degrees of deterioration and degradation of all the organ systems? Like, do you guys, when you give a response, is it like low, medium, high? If my joints are degrading, does it generally give some type of range or grade?
Yeah, it's evolving. So it depends on the organ. For example, the liver, we are measuring liver fat to a couple of decimal points. So you can get a real quantitative score. And what's kind of cool is we see people that have fatty liver, they exercise and work out. They focus on this for 12 months. They come back for another scan and it's completely gone. So there's nothing more rewarding than, being able to reverse some of these conditions. For other organs, it's a little bit more qualitative, but we do have a bunch of AI that we're training right now to help people understand sort of how every system in their bodies is aging. We mentioned at the beginning that people age different ways. Some people might age cardiovascularly. Other people, their focus might be neurodegeneration. Other folks might be renal function, and so on. So just being able to look at your brain and being able to say, hey, you're 50, but you have a brain of someone who's 40. That's awesome. But your challenge here is your spinal degeneration looks like you're 60. So that's, everyone will have something to focus on. So we're working hard on bringing these sort of metrics to individuals. We don't quite have it yet. We have it running internally. But in the future, I would love you to come back for a scan, and we'll be able to go back and look at your data and see how you have, for years past, how have your organ system aged? Have they aged a year as well, or have you done better?
Yeah, that was actually one of the questions I wanted to double click on today is, you look at something like epigenetics and we can see your chronological versus your biological age. And to do that with an image based on organ systems, based on joints, that would be extremely interesting. And I think most people egocentrically want to be, the youngest they can. And I think it gives us a specific target. I think people love to have targets.
Yeah. Well, that's when we first start to notice young people and their spinal degeneration it was the first model we built. And we expected a kind of a straight line, with every year that you age, the model sort of assessed that the average spine was getting 1 year older. But what we found was there was like this flat line and then it went up.
Huh.
And that flat line was everyone between the age of 20 and 40 had more or less the same spine.
Interesting.
And it was only after 40 it started getting worse. And that's when we first realized that there was this potential hidden epidemic that people weren't speaking about, which is the degeneration in younger people.
Yeah, I'm going to bring some people on to talk about what drives that. So the concept is very interesting to me, like what's driving any type of bone degeneration, because, the first inclination is like, well, it's probably nutritionally based. It's probably to do with light, because light would be, infrared may be a driver there. It's certainly to do with the absence of enough movement and blood flow, but definitely something I can double click on with future guests who are experts in bone density and bone remineralization.
And there is, we don't do this yet. We hope to do it in the future, but there are really interesting scans you can do with MRI that also do quantitative mapping of cartilage.
Very cool.
That really help you understand how you're sort of like wearing that down as you age too. I think that would be a great for the your sort of audience, or if people are interested in performance optimization and staying, fit, healthy, a lot of mobility later in age. The earlier we can start tracking that, the better as well.
Yeah, there's a company called Springbok. I'm not sure if that's who you're referring to, but they're super detailed with like muscular quality, tendon quality. So I definitely have intentions of digging into that, because a lot of my guys, myself, to be honest, arrogantly want to maintain the highest level of muscle quality. I'm a muscle guy, so I want to make sure the highest level of muscle quality is always sort of at the forefront of my mind, because I believe if we maintain high-level muscle quality, that means high-level joint quality, that means high-level movement, that means better cardiovascular health. I believe muscle is sort of the first domino that should go down for most people.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate insight. We do work with Springbok, and we have our own body composition model that's pretty similar, where we measure the volume of all different organs in the body, all of different muscle groups in the body. We can measure muscle symmetry. We're looking for fat in muscle, fat in the liver, pericardial fat, and so on over time. So I think everyone is trying to get more quantitative. The more you can measure, the more you can sort of track progress over time.
I'm looking at my scans, and it's just phenomenal, the images you guys are able to provide. Like, I'm looking at the top of my head right now. I'm looking at my torso, my eyes jutting out of my head. It's really cool. And I mean, it's a lot of information, looking at my prostate, like how cool is this? Like I think everyone should have, a baseline version of this to explore in their 20s, and then every few years certainly go back to explore.
Well, I think the really interesting thing, and why it's so important to get one of these when you're young and healthy as a baseline, is you can really learn important insights into your health.
Yep.
We have a lot of patients that come in that, for example, don't know they only have one kidney. They might have been playing sport or karate, take a chop to the abdomen, and one kidney atrophies and dies, and the other one grows to sort of take on the extra load. But it's something important to know. If you only got one, you want to look after it. We have some patients where all the organs are reversed in their bodies.
Yeah, I've heard that.
It's, I find it just insanely crazy that you could be like a 6-year-old person and not know that your organs are reversed. So, we want people to know the inside of their body as well as the outside of your body when you look in the mirror every day. And if we do that, I think people will have more insights into how to improve their health.
Yeah, these images in schools, textbook, or even in the classroom would, I think, be extremely valuable for people to start understanding, like, oh, that's my body. What am I looking at here? Aneurysm detection. Oh, very cool. Pancreatics. So many things. Yeah. Like, Very, very fascinating system. What are the other common reasons why people choose to come and do a Prenuvo? Is again, we went through cancer, went through the brain, went through heart. We didn't talk too much about the liver, but you did mention that you guys have pretty detailed ability to explore liver fat, which obviously has incredible metabolic implications. How about like from a digestive perspective, or from a prostate perspective, or testicular cancer perspective? How does that all, is that something you guys do pretty deeply?
So I do think it's sort of interesting. People don't always come in. I mean, a lot of these sort of underlying conditions are very, people aren't necessarily aware of them. So we do find people generally come in for one of three reasons. They're proactive and they want to stay on top of their health. They feel like they have a family history of something. Now is typically cancer or aneurysm, but it could be other things. And they want to make sure that they don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a third category, which is people might have symptoms of something and they haven't got answers from the health system. And we have to be careful about that third category because we're a screening exam, we're not a diagnostic exam. If you have specific symptoms, there are often a specific test that's going to be better. But those are sort of the three reasons people come in. Now, there's like really interesting differences by sex. And again, this is the danger of stereotyping, but I just seen it to be so true. A lot of women will come in and say, I've got a problem right here, and I want to know what the answer is. A lot of men will come in and say, I'm doing this because I think it's cool. They'll just be completely oblivious to underlying chronic conditions, particularly inflammatory conditions. We have men that we'll find like severe colitis and they have no idea. They just thought it was normal to go to the bathroom 10 times a day. So it's a real challenge if you're not, it's a real opportunity, I guess, for men who may not be as in tune with their bodies. And for conditions where, they change a little bit every year, and the rate of change is so slow that you sort of like lose sight of what a normal bowel movement used to be 20 years ago. Or you lose sight of how you used to feel when you woke up, and jumped out of bed 20 years ago. So, this degraded state of health has become your new normal. And it's really great to do these exams and just sort of like do a reset and really help, particularly men, understand what's going on.
Yeah. I think it'd be a hard question to answer, but is there a regular cadence where people are doing these things? I think obviously the more healthy you are, maybe the less often you need it, but if you're somebody who's trying to correct something, you need it more often. But is there something you guys recommend as far as frequency? It is an hour-long process. You are in an MRI machine. I'm sure most people don't love it. I did enjoy, watching a great podcast while I was in there, but I'm curious if there's a frequency, or if someone comes in to do the low frequent or the I guess the low density image versus the really high density. You sort of mentioned there's an upgraded image. Like, is there a cadence there?
I would say there's like no clear pattern. It depends why people are coming in. We have people that are really into improving their health or into longevity, and they think of us as like you're doing all this training sort of during the season, and we are like the marathon they do once a year to really understand whether they've improved their PR. Mm-hmm. We have other folks that are really concerned about family history of cancer. They come in every year. We have some people that, might put it off and come in every 2 or 3 years. We recommend yearly. Obviously, the more time that passes between scans, the more likelihood there is for something that could be life-threatening to sort of take hold. But, it's a bit all over the map at the moment. People are still trying to understand what is the right cadence.
Yeah. And I wanted to finish with the question, like, what's the future hold for Prenuvo? But I think you kind of touched on it. There's a lot of AI integration, definitely upgrading some of the scores. So the ability to grade yourself against other ages, or to determine your biological or your age, I guess, of each tissue. But anything else that's on the horizon for Prenuvo?
Well, just generally speaking, the modality we use is MRI. And MRI is incredibly good for soft tissue. And even though it's been around for like 30 years, we're only really scratching the surface of what these machines can do. So we're really excited. We do a lot of internal experimentation with new sequences to see parts of the body in new ways. And we just think there's a whole bunch of new insights we can bring to customers over the coming years to help them understand at a much deeper level their health. So we're sort of at the beginning.
Yeah.
I think scans will get only more powerful. As you come in for each scan, you're going to see changes that are going to sort of add more richness to the insights you have about your health.
Yeah, very cool. And there's Prenovos all over North America, is there not?
Yeah, we have 23 in the US. We have clinics in Canada, Australia, and the UK as well. So we're
Wow.
starting to outside of the US.
Well, congratulations on all your success. I think it's doing something incredible for certainly my space, for my clients. I've got I don't know, probably 10 or so clients who have done their Prenuvo, and we just really loved it. Love the results, love the depth of insight, love the images. Some people had some really valuable insights, meaning like we could actually action a lot of them. Some of them had nothing and gave them peace of mind. And both of those for me are a win. So I'm grateful that you made time to come on the show with us today and give a little insight to our people. And I'll link to Prenuvo in the show notes. And if there's anything else you'd like to direct our audience to, I'd love to hear it.
No, just they can visit us at prenuvo.com, and we have a team there. If people want to reach out, ask questions to make sure the scan is right for them, they're happy to talk, answer whatever questions people might have. And I guess my final thought would be, it's today is a day to sort of look for more insights into your health. It's so easy to put these things off. A lot of people have fear about what they might find, and I like to remind people that fear is that's not a problem with you. That's the fact that we live with a healthcare system that diagnoses disease late. Yeah. And if all the stories you hear are bad stories, I completely understand why people might hesitate to want to really understand more about their own health. But we're in the business of creating good stories, of catching disease early, giving people insights so they can avoid, a surgery or avoid medication or avoid a chronic disease ever arriving at a chronic stage. So I really hope people sort of, take a leap and, take advantage of tests like what we do and other tests out there to get as much insights about their health as possible.
Yeah, that's such a great insight. And on top of that, the ability to action these images, right? The ability to see a cancer and be like, oh, there's ways we can reverse this, or there's ways we can have it removed, or if we see some arthrosclerosis or specifically any degeneration of your joints, any degeneration of your brain, we can actually action these things significantly to reverse them. I think that information is just as important as the diagnosis. So yeah, we can see it, but now there's so much that we can do to help reverse any deterioration related to neglect or age or whatever it may be. Not all things, but a lot of things. So I think it's an empowering place to come at the world for most of our audience.
Well, and we didn't even touch on this, but like I'm so optimistic that if we start diagnosing these conditions earlier, we will discover interventions that are effective.
Yeah, agreed.
Alzheimer's is a great example. We've spent tens of billions of dollars on drugs to reverse Alzheimer's, but we only ever really test them on people that have pretty advanced disease. Mm-hmm. If you could start picking up these problems earlier, we're going to find new interventions that are going to be effective, and I think it's going to lead to longer, healthier lives.
Well, I think we already have, it's like they're calling it type 3 diabetes and like control your metabolism, step 1, control what goes in your mouth. And I'm not someone who ridicules people or condemns people for having bad nutritional habits, but I'm someone who says, hey, do you realize there's ways you can change your relationship with food? You can change your impulsive eating. Like we have the tools now to remove the impulsive eating that people ultimately become addicted to. And I'm sort of on this train of like, I believe obesity is going to be a thing of the past in the next 10 years. I don't think it's going to exist because we have things from, peptides and metabolic optimization agents and really improved exercise protocols that are specific to your genetics or nutrition plans that are specific to your genetics. And I think that's just the future.
Yeah, I think, although, again, just to cut people a bit of slack, I think there is something really important about being able to see a picture of your own body. It makes it harder for you to ignore, what's going on. I think, I lived in Europe for some time. There on a smoking packet, you see a picture of some horrible diseased lungs, and you got to look at that thing every time you want to get a smoke. Ideally, you're more likely to quit. I grew up in Australia. They run these commercials where it's like, wear your seatbelt when you drive your car, and they just tell you that. They show someone going through the front window of a car in a car accident and sort of like dying on the sidewalk. So I think being able to visualize and if it's your body rather than sort of a generic body, it's all the more powerful catalyst for change.
I think they showed that the images on the cigarette packs didn't change behaviors. It's crazy that it's not real for people until it happens to them. Unfortunately, it's like, oh, that's over there. But I do agree with you that these images are something that makes it real for you, right? Because like me seeing someone else's mouth or throat cancer or whatever, like whatever, it's not me. But if I start to see it growing in myself, now all of a sudden it's real and I get punched in the throat. then I can do something about it instead of being, a victim to it.
Well, and I don't know anyone. I know that we have hired people at the company that smoked, and we scan all of our employees. If they want to, and we'll show them. It's like, oh, here's the inflammation in your lungs and the apex of your lungs. This is where lung cancer likes to start, and they'll quit, having seen those pictures. So, yeah, it's a great catalyst.
Awesome, Andrew. Well, you've created a great business and a great technology that's helping a lot of people. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you making the time, and look forward to working together in the future.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.